Hello, and welcome to the online lecture for Chapter 13. In this chapter, we'll be examining leadership in the event of a crisis. And our authors tell us that there are three stages to a crisis event. There's pre-crisis, there's the crisis event itself, and then there's post-crisis. And that sounds pretty straightforward, but there are particular activities that a leader should be doing in each of these phases. So we're going to examine the characteristics of each of these phases and what tasks a leader should take on in order to have the best possible outcome to the crisis. So let's begin by looking at the pre-crisis period. Crisis hasn't occurred yet. Well, what does a smart leader do before there's a crisis? Maybe things are going along swimmingly in the organization, profits are up, everybody's getting along, and many leaders won't think about trouble in a case like that. Some will say if there isn't any trouble, don't go looking for it. They're content with the status quo, and they figure that they will put out any fires as they occur. But a smart leader is going to take a problem-finding orientation. You might remember that term from an earlier chapter. A smart leader, even when things are going well, they're going to be looking for ways to improve processes. So they'll be examining work processes, talking to followers, and seeing what can we do to make things go smoothly, what are some potential things that could go wrong, and how can we avert a crisis before it even happens. So as a leader, when things are going well for you, consider it a pre-crisis stage and that you can always be doing something to avert future trouble. Once you've identified some things that could potentially go wrong, you can put plans in place ahead of time to help you handle that situation if it actually occurs. For example, if you're the leader of an organization that deals in handling food, what do you do if there's a food poisoning outbreak that's traced back to you? If you handle some sort of chemicals, what do you do if there's a spill or there's contamination? If there is a fire, do employees know what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to go? Who's responsible for what? Is there a chain of people who make phone calls? And practice these things so that your organizational followers can spring into action if something happens and there isn't a lot of confusion and delay in handling the crisis. Another important idea of crisis management in organizations is to think about succession planning. When things are going well, we might not put a lot of thought into what would happen if the leader is not able to fulfill their duties. Accidents and illness can occur very suddenly. If you have a plan in place, then everyone knows what they should do to keep the organization operating smoothly. So there isn't an interruption in service to customers, for example. It's always wise to have a written plan in place for that. Who is the second in command, the third in command? Who takes over if the leader is unable to fulfill their duties for a short or a longer period of time? What would be the process for choosing a new leader? If someone is only going to be acting as an interim leader, how do you go about getting someone permanent in the new position? Those are all things that are useful to think about when things are going well and to have a good plan in place. So let's assume the crisis has actually occurred and you're the leader. What is it that you need to do to start managing the crisis? Well, you're expected to initiate action and coordinate the activities. If you're in the leadership position, people are going to look at you and say, tell us what to do. They might be frozen with fear and indecision. You can't be. If you've done your pre-crisis planning and you've thought through what you would do in different situations, then you'll have some idea of how to move forward. But people are going to be looking to you for guidance. I had an incident where a student had a medical problem, a seizure, in my classroom, and all of the students looked at me. What do we do? Nobody knew what to do. And it was my responsibility to say, okay, you and you take care of her in this way. You call 911. I appointed a couple of students to go downstairs in the classroom building to the main floor and wait for the ambulance and to bring the medical team up to our classroom. I had to think those things through very quickly and appoint people to do those things because, again, all the eyes in the room turned toward me to say, what do we do? During the crisis, a leader needs to act as a spokesperson. If there are any messages that need to go out to the public or to the press, it's useful to appoint one person to do that and to tell everybody else not to speak to the public about the incident, but to refer any questions to the leader. That way you can take control of the message that you're putting out, and you can give the same message to everyone who is asking. During the crisis, a leader must engage in vigilant decision making. You need to be able to make quick and decisive choices because, again, people are looking to you. You don't have a lot of time to second guess yourself. You don't have time to gather information or ask others' opinions. You have to be very confident in the decisions you're making in that moment. At the same time, you want to connect those decisions with the broader vision and values of the organization. So even though you're having to act quickly, you still want to act in concert with the greater goals of the organization. After the crisis is apparently over, there's still some work to be done. It's not time to give a big sigh of relief and to rest. You need to do a little bit of post-crisis analysis here. One step that needs some thought is rebuilding the organization's image. The image or reputation of your organization might have suffered some damage both internally and externally. So you might have to create a public relations campaign to improve the organization's image with the public. You might have to conduct internal meetings to reassure followers, employees. Some of them might be feeling disgruntled, feeling that it's not a good place to work, or feeling that leadership didn't take adequate care to avert the crisis in the first place. So you want to address all those issues in a very forthright manner so that you can learn from the experience, and this can become your pre-crisis planning going forward. You want to promote healing. There may have been some damage done to relationships within the organization that needs some time and some discussion in order to bring back together. So as a leader, you need to be thinking about all of these things in the aftermath of a crisis. As you go through that post-crisis evaluation process, you'll want to decide what needs to be done in the short term and in the long term. So what kind of actions do we need to take immediately to get our organization, our group, our company back on its feet and moving forward? And then what do we need to do in the long term to manage the damage that has been done? So how can the organization learn from the experience and put formal plans in place in case such a thing happens again? Perhaps the leader didn't do their pre-crisis planning where they thought about things that could go wrong and make a plan, and the crisis happened, and maybe things were not managed well during the crisis. Well, now you have a chance to analyze how you did handle it, what could have been done maybe to avert it from happening, and what you can do in the future. So again, the process kind of comes full circle, and this becomes pre-crisis planning at this point. A couple of examples of crisis management that come from everyday life that we can all probably remember seeing. When you see ads for prescription drug products on television and they give you a long list of possible side effects or warnings about you shouldn't take this product if you have this condition, those kind of warnings, we could look at that as pre-crisis planning because they are warning you about potential problems that could happen and also protecting themselves by telling you about them. We could also look at that as post-crisis planning Those warnings are probably coming out of the aftermath of a crisis where a customer, a user of the product had a problem and there was some complication for the company because of that, and now they've decided that going forward they need to give that warning. So there's probably both some pre-crisis and post-crisis elements to those warnings. Think about how McDonald's puts a warning on their coffee cups that coffee is served hot. You may or may not have heard of a famous court case a few years back where a woman burned herself on some McDonald's coffee, and that kind of gave rise to this warning we now see on fast food beverage containers that the drinks are served hot. Again, it's kind of a response to a post-crisis event, but it's also pre-crisis planning for the future. So we can see that cycle occurring in these examples, and maybe you can think of others. Please read the chapter carefully. Contact me if you have any questions or problems, and I'll see you over in the next module.